People want to conquer the world, but when they do, frequently they just kind of call it there. But here at Lemon Cake Research Incorporated, we take it a step further. It is not just in our desire to conquer the world. No, we must also learn how to govern the goddamn thing. We need this thing called governing capacity, and we need a lot of it. So I say out with small government. It's big government time. Let's get this governing capacity. Disclaimers, this run will not include the plus 20 you get from each expand administration action. Since then, it becomes a run about stacking government reform progress growth, which may be an interesting video from the time, but that's not quite what we're going for here. So if you do want to do this at home yourself, you should end up with quite a bit more using the button. Otherwise, Ironman enabled, achievements compatible, standard setup. Which yet again hurts. I'm looking at that plus 40% in the custom nation idea set and realize there's nothing even close to what we're getting here in terms of any individual modifier. So here we are in the game now. Is it time for another Native American playthrough? Is it time for something more obscure like some random European tag? Are we going to Slavonia again or something? No, but we definitely are obscure. We need to get ourselves over to Southeast Asia and need to play the nation of Taingu? They have Burmese ideas. Anyway, the reason we are playing this country and this country specifically, this literal random OPM with 14 development as a tributary state of Ava, is, well, their missions. If we conquer Lower Burma through this mission and start invading Arakan into that state and then, going to the north as well, we can then go and conquer Bengal, which is quite an ambitious, albeit rather doable task from the starting position. Definitely not something trivial though. It's a non-trivial start. Doing this will give us the Burmese expansion at the end of the game, giving us 10% governing capacity. And yes, this is the entire reason we're starting as this tag. It's for this governing capacity modifier until the end of the game. This is also probably a good time to explain the counter. We will have a source of both flat governing capacity and percentage governing capacity. I'm going to keep them separate for the duration of the video and combine them at the end. While we're still in Taingu, another good thing we should probably do is get our ideas sorted. First of all, we're going to need to take administrative for the 20% governing capacity modifier finisher. Then we will need to get into aristocratic as well as infrastructure. The reason for those last two is that this allows us to take the aristocratic rule for 10% governing capacity modifier. If you are doing this at home, I won't take it here, but you should. Also, the licensing of the press act is a great one to pick up for 20% reform progress growth, since reform progress growth can be converted into governing capacity, just something we're not including in this run, as mentioned from the disclaimer. Now, before we continue, we need to introduce the first RNG mechanic, which is out of control for the early game, but something you should look at securing once you establish yourself. We need to ensure that the Yazd Zoroastrians manage to survive. We won't end up switching Zoroastrian itself until the late 1700s, spoilers, but they need to be there for the switch to occur eventually, hence the earlier you make your way over there, the less you have to rely on Timmy or a Jam taking the no converti Dimmy privilege. They tend to do this pretty consistently from my testing, but it's something that you should definitely bear in mind, so don't put this off for too long. Now it's time to get some fancy buildings. Before you leave the area, make sure to pop over to Ayutthaya and get the Grand Palace of Bangkok. At the highest level, it provides 15 governing capacity and quite nicely doesn't have any requirements attached to it. Then, make your way over to Europe. This is something you want to be doing anyway, but we'll get to why later. Once you're in Italy, make sure to make a quick pit stop over at Naples. Personally, I would do it for the pizza anyway, but since you're in the area, make sure to also pick up the Royal Palace of Caserta. Not only does the palace provide reform progress growth for pressing the button more, something we're again not including in the run, it also provides a flat 100 governing capacity. What's also great about this monument is yet again it has no requirements apart from owning the goddamn thing. The final target of escapades is going to be El Escorial. This building in Spain does have a requirement, the culture group must be Iberian for the local culture, and we'll need to accept that culture in question, which will provide us with 10% governing capacity modifier on top when it has been upgraded to the maximum level. Before we continue in terms of the flat modifiers we're getting, we will need to perform an HRE revoke later. Not only the revoke, we'll also need to annex the HRE and form the tag itself. This is something that you should bear in mind during your setup, as this will be an excellent time for you to, while conquering into Italy and Spain, to flip Catholic or whatever heresy the HRE is running around with these days. Once you've done that, you will probably want to be grabbing the emperorship through an election and starting to work on your reforms. Don't leave it too late. Unless you're using the fast revoke exploit, in which case you can leave it to like the last 10 years of the game. While you are doing all of that, you will need to acquire the economic hegemony, which at maximum power will give you 20% governing capacity. After which you'll need to make your way over to Russia and become a Muscovite, or any other culture that can form Russia. And now you will need to form Russia, but be very careful. I'm going to assume that you are going for the emperorship here. If you form Russia, if you are not currently an elector or the emperor, you will leave the empire. So make sure that is resolved. Make sure you don't leave the empire in the process. Nothing bad happens if you leave, but it's going to make your life slightly harder than it has to. Now, the Burmese ideas aren't necessarily bad, I don't think, but I think the Russian ideas are probably better, so I would recommend switching. Another thing that you will need to grab is going to be the Mandate of Heaven. Not because we need the Mandate itself, but because it gives us access to the plus 500 governing capacity reform. On the topic of reforms, pick up L'État Semoir itself for another 250 governing capacity. The more observant members of my audience would have now pointed out that we have achieved an incredibly convoluted triple the Rome achievement, which is rather ironic given that at no point during this do we 1. Hold Rome, or 2. Form the actual Roman Empire. I guess we form the Holy version of the Empire later, so it's not too bad. So, while you're waiting for the 1700s and the Age of Revolutions, a couple things to do right now is, again, go through your reforms and get ready for a revoke, and your Zoroastrians need to be spreading around. You will need to flip into them as well, but make sure you don't flip into them before you do your HRE shenanigans. Once we do arrive at the Age of Revolutions, you will see why we had to form Russia. We will get their age ability for 33% governing capacity, from the Splendor bonus. Thankfully, we will keep this when we do more shenanigans, as now we get to form the Holy Empire itself to get the 10% governing capacity in their ideas. Yes, we will need to unite Germany, that's this area, to get the same buff to our governing capacity as uniting this area as, well, I guess we're Russia now. Finally, use those Zoroastrians that you had breeding earlier to flip Zoroastrian yourself, and pick up the Zoroastrian Manthras for a final 10% governing capacity. Unfortunately, and this is demonstrated in the save here, you will not have access to the Cossacks estate. The Cossacks estates, on top of requiring you to own a steppe province, also requires you to have the Eastern Teg group. This is something you don't possess, and as such will not have access to the East, to the Cossacks. No worries, we can still give out plus 100 governing capacity, as well as a final plus 100 per state to the eunuchs, which we'll have when we get the mandate, bringing us to plus 400 from the estate privileges. To conclude, we'll also need to get until Admin Tech 31 to get the 1700 governing capacity from technology. But with all that being done, that is going to have to be it for the modifier stacking, which should leave us with a ridiculous 8449 governing capacity. But that is all I have time for today. If you think I've missed something, do let me know in the comments. As always, thank you very much for watching, and a like and a sub will be appreciated. See you in the next one.